Good afternoon or morning, Cert 3 Community Services from Glendale. Hope you're doing okay. Beautiful day down here at the lake. But I thought I'd just do a quick video. Actually, it may not be a quick video. I'll do a video just to see if we can guide you through this last unit that I'll be covering this year, the homelessness unit. So I work with people experiencing homelessness. So I'm just going to focus on the knowledge side of things, so knowledge question here, but the first questions there are part one, access, equity and human rights quiz, so true, false, that sort of things. They launch straight into that sort of, I guess, from a legalist perspective, and I think it's more appropriate that I give a little bit of background before just launching into the human rights and legal side of things. So just briefly, I guess we're all aware, or very aware, that homelessness is an ongoing issue. It's been a sector there where I've been touched in and out of as a worker since the mid-80s, and it's, I guess, really unfortunately continued to grow, I guess, in terms of services being stretched and the need for services and the need to support people who are at risk or experiencing homelessness. So I'll just have a look at this little diagram, this wheel, some of the causes of homelessness in Australia, and they're very complex and interrelated. And in the middle there, you've got domestic violence as the single biggest cause of homelessness in Australia. And yeah, certainly we all agree with that, I would imagine. But people escaping their home because it's unsafe, and that could be women and children, could be young people who are being abused in some way, and it's not safe for them to stay at home. Are probably less likely for men to escape their home because of violence, but it is still possible. That would be the minority. By far, it's women and children and young people escaping family homes because of violence. Men have their own issues, and I guess some of those are captured in this wheel as well. We're looking at the mental health side of things there, and I guess there's a real nexus between all of these. So if you're escaping home because of violence, obviously your mental health is struggling, or it could be a standalone mental health issue in a sense, and that's made it untenable or unmanageable for you to continue to maintain a stable living environment, unable to pay the rent perhaps, or continue to maintain employment or relationships because of mental health struggles. Family breakdown, another one mentioned there, unemployment. Poverty, I guess, is underlying all of this. Whenever people are struggling in all these areas that I'm, mentioning on this wheel, but living in poverty obviously is something that often binds all these things together. There's shortage of affordable housing, is mentioned down there in the bottom corner, and that's something that's really at the fore at the moment. And I guess the structure of our economy and society has meant that affordable housing is becoming more and more unattainable, unreachable. People living isolated lives there, that social isolation, so for disconnected from I guess networks and family or friends or support people. And I guess a lot of those issues that we've just looked there, whether it be mental health, family breakdown, unemployment, certainly have a connection or a root connection to all of these issues. Sexual assault leading to homelessness is mentioned there, and certainly there are people who are at very high risk, I guess, of being abused and assaulted. And if you're perhaps that's going on in your own personal life, or once you're living living rough on the streets, or perhaps in unstable accommodation, boarding houses, or caravan parks, for example, perhaps you're certainly increased at risk of experiencing sexual assault. Addiction and gambling is mentioned up the top there, and obviously we can see the link between that and homelessness and all those other things mentioned, from family breakdown to mental health to social isolation. So yeah, as you can see, it's a very interrelated sphere. So just giving that little bit of a background snapshot of homelessness, I think, is important. And just some of the stats, and these are from the 2016 census. There were 116,000 people approximately classified being homeless. The homelessness rate in New South Wales has grown. It had grown by 27%, and I guess continues to grow, to be fair and honest. There are people living in supported accommodation, and that was 21,000 people there. There are rough sleepers, people living under bridges, on the streets, for example, 8,200. Youth or young people made up 32% of the homeless population, and I guess there's some sort of connection to some of those issues of poverty and support networks and knowing what to do, mental health challenges for young people in particular that make it maybe very hard to deal with homelessness. So yes, nearly 60% of homeless people in New South Wales are under 35. The number of homeless people aged 55 and above had increased. I guess just briefly touch on some of these strategies. So refuges, short-term options for people who are homeless, whether it be young people, men, women or children. And sometimes people are put up in a motel as that by government department, just as a stopgap measure. Longer term low cost housing, so places like Compass Housing or Department of Housing, caravan parks, boarding houses, they fall under that stopgap low cost sort of housing measures. There's a big event I'll just mention now up front, Homeless Connect in Hunter. It's been online in the last couple of years because of COVID, but it has been a very big event for at least 10 years, and it brings all the services together, and people who are at risk or homeless come to the event. Most recently it was at the showground or the entertainment centre in that sort of precinct around Broadmeadow. We're covering the region though. There's other sort of Homeless Connect events in Sydney, Central Coast and other parts of the state, but it is a one-stop shop. You can get a haircut, you can get your birth certificate, link into Centrelink, link into other services. Just there's a few other there that I've mentioned. Our Backyard, I'll just mention, and they're a service not too far from Glendale. They're just around Cardiff, Macquarie Hills perhaps. There's a church there up the back there. So Our Backyard is for people who are living in their car. So sometimes people escaping or living without anywhere else they can access, but they do have a car. So this is a safe space to sleep. There's showers, toilets, kitchenette, that sort of thing. So it's a really good service. Just again, I'm just giving that broad-based snapshot introduction. We'll call this one the intro video, but some important numbers to know. There's Link to Home. So if anyone's homeless in Australia, 1800 152 152. It's a free phone service, and it's a place to find a bed short term while you look for something more stable. So this has come from social media from Hume Housing. So Hume's a housing. Hume Housing is a non-government housing provider looking for that social housing, that low-cost housing, trying to house people that are vulnerable or at risk with complex needs. Housing, Compass, they're two of the bigger ones, working alongside and in conjunction with largely the Department of Housing, which is the government department. So Compass and Hume, they're non-government services, but they do support that short-term and other longer-term, low-cost social housing options. What else can you do? Here's just from the Hume Housing social media resource. Ask Izzy is a really good one. So as a person or a worker even, you type into, go to that askizzy.org.au, type in, it's quite easy to use, and you'll find a range of services to fit what you're looking for. Still have questions? Here's a number to call at Hume. So just I thought I'd mention that. But I think we've done a little bit of a good background, but I guess there are certainly vulnerable groups, I guess young people living in poverty, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander young people with mental health issues. Perhaps if you're from a non-English speaking background, if you're a young person leaving state care or care of the state, you really are at risk. And did I mention the juvenile justice system? So if you're involved in that as a young person, you're a really heightened risk of becoming homeless. Yes, that domestic violence is that really big critical factor, and it is, we know it's an issue, and it's still an issue being spoken about in this country and across all realms. I guess that abuse of power, from our politicians to other leaders, it comes up from time to time. People who are entrusted positions of power, and we find that they've abused those positions of power, perhaps in personal relationships, perhaps in their working life as well. Just to this thing a little bit about men. What's different about men, I guess, is that, yes, they certainly do make up a significant number of homeless people. And what we find is if you're 35 and older and you're homeless, and you're male, you're probably dealing with complex and chronic health and mental health issues. So you're becoming much more entrenched in a sense. As a younger person, you're vulnerable, dealing with those sort of challenges. But once you've got to an older man, I guess, I think they've said 35 and over, but, creeping up a bit in age, I suppose. If you're homeless, it's usually because there's chronic stuff going on. I just mentioned stereotypes, and I guess just think about those. Often it is about people, any vulnerable group, there's a stereotype and a negative, and we've spoken about that in diversity and other units. But thinking about that, how people are often blamed, in a sense. Why didn't you do this, or didn't you do that? Shouldn't you do that? Lift yourself up by your bootstraps. So think about unpacking that as a worker. Just some definitions. I'll just touch on these. And I guess this intro has probably gone a little bit longer than I thought, but as I said, I didn't feel quite right just launching straight into human rights and legal stuff. Just a few definitions though around homelessness. So primary homelessness, so that's the people living rough, sleeping rough, out of roof over their head. So primary. Secondary homelessness, so they might be doing some sort of temporary sort of accommodation, some sort of refuge or youth refuge, emergency accommodation. Couch surfing is classified into here for secondary homelessness. So often young people find somewhere to crash, sleep on someone's couch, go to a mate, stay there for a week or a month, and then move on to the next person. So they've got a roof over their head on a couch, but it's short term, and you can't stay there forever. There's another category we've got in Australia, tertiary homelessness. So that's categorised for people staying in substandard accommodation, so places like boarding houses or caravan parks. So boarding houses typically, it might be very crowded, sharing a communal bathroom or toilet or kitchen. Perhaps dingy and not necessarily safe for certain groups of people. Perhaps even, let's say younger women, perhaps it would probably feel extremely vulnerable if boarding houses are frequented by primarily males. Older males, and perhaps dealing with addictions and other unmanaged sort of concerns like mental health, as an example. And caravan parks as well. There was a show, Filthy Rich and Homeless, last year, and one of the participants, I guess they're well known and high profile people, was a doctor, Andrew, somebody I think, ended up at the caravan park at Freeman's Waterhole, not too far from us, on the edge of Lake Macquarie, LGA. You might know it, but I guess it's often used as that stopgap. Let's get you a roof over your head, let's get into this caravan park. And although there may be a sense of community, there's certainly, in some ways, there's some positives, but in other ways, it's certainly substandard, things like electricity, power points, wires hanging out, not particularly safe necessarily, other vulnerabilities to personal safety, I think, for people who are living in a caravan park, like that. All right, so there are those definitions. I guess briefly, COVID has really impacted on the homelessness front. Things like domestic violence, people doing it tough, and stress and mental health have all probably increased, the stats are telling us. There are some commitments for New South Wales government to boost some temporary accommodation and rental assistance packages and hotels, and I know that was an action in COVID, was to get people off the street, rough sleepers, and get them into accommodation like motels or caravan parks, I believe, and that perhaps is coming to an end now, and so we may see people back on the streets, I think is what I'm hearing. But I guess in general terms, the sector is asking for better funded services, whether that be intervention, early intervention, emergency or medium-term supported accommodation, or all sorts of innovative housing models. And even down the bottom there of this slide, I'm looking at more programs to end domestic and family violence. So wouldn't that be fantastic to have a real push on ending domestic and family violence? So that information comes from the Y Foundation. They're a bit of a peak organisation for youth affairs and youth issues in our state, New South Wales in particular. Just having a look at this slide where their vision for a future to end youth homelessness. So the first three ones, are quite, I guess, self-explanatory in that, you want a safe and stable place to live, and you want to be healthy and well, whether that's physically and mentally, of course, both. I like the last two though, connections and partnerships, looking at ways to make sure that they are enhanced for all citizens. And education and employment. To me, education and employment is a big key, not the only key, but it is a big key to people moving on to better lives. Okay, so I'm going to call this the intro video, video 1. I'm going to leave it there. Toodle pips.